On the 29th of June 2026, I was escorted off of Royal Caribbean's Brilliance of the Seas in Ravenna, Italy by security. I was not removed at the end of my holiday. It was technically actually the embarkation day of a new one, but I was removed at a port where I had not embarked whilst travelling on consecutive or back-to-back sailings. I had signed a promissory note for my onboard account, which allows me to pay down the account within a short period at a later date. And there's a reason I was doing that. That note that I signed stated that I had 10 days to pay. Later on that day, I was then approached by 6 security personnel in my cabin and told that unless I paid down the balance immediately in cash, I would be escorted off the ship and not able to sail. So I didn't have the cash available at the time, and in hindsight, I should have asked what the amount was that I owed, which will come into play later. But regardless, I was taken off the vessel with my luggage. It was around 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, so roughly 37 degrees Celsius. And to their credit, they offered me an air-conditioned shuttle to Ravenna train station, but no other communication. At this point, I had assumed this was a payment dispute gone wrong and scrambled to try and call family, as well as collections and post-reservations for Royal Caribbean and the casino team, for which the booking was booked under, so that I could settle with collections and return to sailing. Later on that evening, the full balance on my signed promissory note was then taken from my bank account anyway. And at this stage, I believed that everything would be settled and fine, as had happened before, and so booked a room in Bologna. And the next day, on my birthday, I made my way on a flight from Bologna to Barcelona, took a coach to Andorra, which is where I am now. Lovely place, by the way. But this was because I believed that one of my soon-to-be upcoming sailings on Harmony of the Seas on the 12th of July from Barcelona was still active. On the evening of the 1st of July 2026, I was informed by Executive Relations that they had been informed by the internal Royal Global Security team that all of my future Royal Caribbean cruises are being cancelled and that they do not want to do business with me anymore. After this call, I noted that this also seemed to affect my upcoming celebrity sailing as well, which means that this appears to go beyond one Royal Caribbean sailing and into Royal Caribbean group territory. And in fact, this has affected roughly 12 upcoming Royal Caribbean group sailings. And as I record this on the 4th of July, 2026, I still have not been given a clear reason for anything. But this is exactly why I'm making this video. And I know exactly what some people will say. You must have done something. Or there definitely has to be more to this story. Or you don't get removed from a cruise ship for no reason. I understand why people will think that. To be honest, if I saw this video from someone else, part of me would be skeptical and wonder the same thing. So let me be very clear from the start. I'm not asking you to believe I'm perfect. I'm not pretending that I made no mistakes. And I'm not hiding the fact that gambling, onboard charges, and money are potentially part of this problem and this story. What I am saying is very simple. If one of the world's most well-known travel operators removes someone from one of their ships, cancels 12 future cruises, including revoking a celebrity cruise, and says it does not want to do business with them anymore, that company should, I believe, be able to explain what that person supposedly did. And, as I said, that explanation has still not been provided to me. This is the full timeline, what I could prove, where I take responsibility, where I think Royal Caribbean needs to answer serious questions, and what every cruiser should understand about onboard accounts, casino charges, debit cards, and cruise line discretion. So let's start with the fact that I'm not new to Royal Caribbean. I have sailed with them around 30 times. I am Diamond Plus in their Crown and Anchor loyalty scheme. I've spent a huge amount of time and money within the company and have had 12 future cruises booked. This isn't a casual relationship that I've had with a brand that I've tried once. Royal Caribbean actually has now been part of how I travel, how I work remotely, and how I structure my life, and also part of my professional world. See, because I work in travel, I recommend and book cruises. So when something like this happens, it is not only about one disrupted sailing, it affects whether or not I can confidently recommend that product to other people as well. But that doesn't mean I deserve special treatment. Loyalty status obviously shouldn't make someone immune from the rules. But if you've sailed with a company dozens of times, spent heavily with them, even in the last few months, booked future travel with them, and sold their cruises to other people, I do think you are entitled to a clear explanation when that relationship is suddenly ended. So here's the timeline as clearly as I can give it. On the 29th of June 2026, I was on Brilliance of the Seas, and this was part of the third of 3 consecutive sailings. I was not leaving the ship in a normal sense, actually. I was just continuing on the ship. There was an onboard account issue with charges related to the previous sailing from the 22nd to the 29th. I signed a promissory note. The promissory note stated that I had 10 days to pay. Then I was told that I needed to pay immediately in cash or I would be escorted off the ship. I was told this by 6 security personnel in my cabin. This didn't make any sense to me. First, I had just signed a document that stated that I had 10 days to pay. Secondly, I wasn't disappearing anywhere. I was on consecutive sailings. And thirdly, the issue to me at the time was a payment issue. And as I stated to guest services that morning, the payment later cleared from my account anyway. But none of that seemed to matter, and the security were very unsympathetic. So 6 security officers came to my room. I was escorted off the vessel in Ravenna in Italy, and I had my luggage. I was in extreme heat, and I was told to make my way to the train station. They did actually provide a shuttle to the train station for free. This was my birthday sailing, and ironically at the time I was wearing a Royal Caribbean t-shirt. This sailing I had already paid for. This was not actually related to the previous sailing. This was a brand new sailing. And I was suddenly standing ashore in a foreign port trying to work out what the hell just happened. I was beyond upset. I was beyond embarrassed. I was angry. But more than anything, I was confused because this did not feel like the normal handling of an onboard account issue. It did not feel like the handling of the account issues that I had in the Caribbean a year earlier. It felt like I was being treated as a security threat. After I made my way from Ravenna to Bologna to stay the night, because I had booked a flight to Barcelona the following day, the situation became even stranger because the full amount on the signed promissory note that I had given was taken and cleared from my bank account. So the money they wanted was collected anyway. So that raises a very, very obvious question. If the payment system was able and capable of collecting the balance automatically, why was I removed from the ship after signing a promissory note that said I had 10 days to pay? But I'm not saying that I didn't owe an onboard account balance. I am saying that the method and timing of enforcement just made absolutely no sense to me. And I was told that I had to pay immediately in cash, which again, then the system took the money automatically anyway. I was told this was urgent enough to remove me from the ship, and the insinuation was that if there and then I did pay in cash, that I would be able to continue to sail. On the 1st of July, I received an automated communication suggesting the account still had problems even after the money had cleared. This is why I keep coming back to one word: explanation. I need an explanation. I need to explain something that happened to me last year in 2025, because this is the reason I became so cautious about putting cards through Royal Caribbean's onboard payment system. In 2025, I went to the Caribbean and did 15 consecutive Royal Caribbean sailings. That's 15. And actually there were a few news articles, one from the Daily Mail and one from Royal Caribbean blog, that explain why I did that and what I was doing. So you can check those out and I'll put the links in the description. So this was not a normal 1-week holiday where you register a card, spend a bit on board, leave, and everything settles neatly afterwards. This was cruise after cruise after cruise with onboard accounts opening, closing, settling, authorizing, reauthorizing, and overlapping. And that's where I just started to properly understand how messy payment authorizations can actually become. So a payment authorization is not the same as a final charge. It is basically where the merchant is saying to your bank, can we reserve this amount because we might need to charge it later? The bank then sets that money aside. In this instance, the business probably has not necessarily taken the money yet. But from your side, especially if you're using a debit card, that money can become unavailable. Royal Caribbean's own guidance says guests may see pending charges or authorizations on their card. It compares the system to land-based hotels, where an initial pending amount is used to secure funds for expected onboard purchases. If you then spend more on board, further holds can be generated. Royal Caribbean also states that these holds are not charges, but they do reduce your available credit or balance, and depending on your bank, some can take days or even up to 32 days to release. This matters because if you're using a credit card, an authorization hold reduces your available credit, and that can be kind of annoying, but if it clears it within a few days, it's fine. But if you're using a debit card or a travel debit card, like many Europeans and people from the UK do, an authorization hold can reduce your access to actual cash. And when you're traveling continuously like I did last year, because I was doing 15 consecutive sailings, I became very aware on how these authorizations could stack, overlap, linger, and interfere with my access to money. A charge might settle from Royal Caribbean, but the hold would remain. Another sailing would begin, and another onboard account might open, and then another authorization would appear. Now, if you're moving ship to ship, country to country, and relying on access to your own funds, that's not a minor inconvenience. That can affect whether or not you can pay for transport, food, accommodation, transfers, or emergencies, or future cruises. This is why, by 2026, I was extremely cautious about simply putting another card through when there was an onboard account issue. I was not telling Royal Caribbean that I refused to pay, and I never refused to pay. I was saying that I have experienced how these authorization systems can disrupt access to funds, especially on debit-based accounts, and I do not want to trigger another chain of holds that could leave me unable to use my own money. That context matters because when Royal Caribbean Security demanded immediate payment in cash on the 29th of June, my hesitation was not random. It came from previous experience with their payment system during a long run of consecutive sailings. And this is one of the points I think cruisers need to understand before they travel. Cruise ships are not just floating hotels, they are floating payment ecosystems. You are not tapping your card every time you buy something. You are charging things to an onboard account, and that account is backed by a card, cash account, or other payment arrangement. Behind the scenes, authorizations and final charges are likely different things, and the final charge may be correct, but the pending holds are what causes the problems. And especially if you use debit cards, travel cards, or accounts with limited available balance, the system can affect you very differently from someone using a high limit credit card. That is personally why I believe cruise lines need clearer policies for debit card users, especially international guests, because guests should not be forced into taking a line of credit out simply to avoid operational problems created by pending authorizations. So when I was asked on the 29th of June to make an immediate payment, that was the context. It was not simply, I do not want to pay. It was, I have experienced how this payment system can create overlapping holds and restrict access to funds, especially for someone using debit-based accounts whilst traveling continuously. And that's why, in this case, the promissory note mattered. The promissory note appeared to provide a formal route to resolve the account without creating another immediate payment system problem. It said I had 10 days, then I was removed anyway. Slightly further context on this is that I had signed promissory notes before and actually on consecutive sailings, and the consequence of doing so was that they locked the account for that consecutive sailing. You could not leave the ship until the payment had settled. You were not removed from the vessel. Now we need to talk about the casino, because this is where I need to be very honest. Cruise casinos can and do generate serious onboard charges very quickly. I had convinced myself that I could treat casino play as part of a broader cruise value strategy, where you can build points, get offers, future cruises, status, benefits, all of that. I thought I could manage it rationally. There are points here, and especially in this occasion, I was wrong. I got a little bit cocky. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that every single part of this was outside of my control. Gambling was part of the account issue. Casino charges were part of the wider story. I made decisions that contributed to the situation. But that does not answer the question of why I was removed in the way I was removed. It does not explain why a promissory note that gave 10 days to pay was apparently disregarded. It does not explain why I was told to pay immediately in cash. It does not explain why the payment then cleared automatically anyway. And it does not explain why I'm now apparently banned from future Royal Caribbean group travel without being given the specific reasons. Two things can be true at the same time. I can take responsibility for gambling becoming a problem, and Royal Caribbean can still be asked to explain why their response was so severe, so confusing, and so opaque. Before I talk about the future cruises, there is another part of this that made the situation even more confusing. So after I'd been removed from the ship and after the payment had already cleared from my bank account, the following day, I received an automated email stating that I owed roughly $1,630. And that amount was not an amount I recognised from my actual promissory note. It was also sent in relation to the promissory note process, but the deadline given did not match the document I had signed. The promissory note I was given stated that I had 10 days to pay, but the automated email demanded that I make payment by 6th of July, which was 7 days after the note had been given to me. So at this point, I had several things that did not line up. This matters because the payment issue was supposedly the reason I was removed at this point in my head. But the records and communications after the event made the payment issue less clear, not more clear. If the promissory note was valid, why was I removed of it immediately? If the payment had been cleared, why was I still receiving automated demands? And if the note said 10 days, why was the email demanding payment after 7? And if that amount demanded did not match the amount I understood to be outstanding, what account, charge, or guest was that email actually referring to? And that last question matters because I'd already become concerned that the situation may have involved inaccurate information or confusion with another onboard account issue. I am not claiming that as fact, but when you are removed from a ship, then later receive an automated demand for an amount you do not recognize after your own payment has cleared, it is reasonable to ask whether the right records are being linked to the right person. This is why I'm not asking Royal Caribbean for an apology. I'm asking them to explain the account trail. What was the balance on my promissory note? What was that $1,630? Why did that email say payment was due by 6th of July? Why did that deadline differ from the 10-day period stated on my promissory note? Why was that email sent after the balance had already cleared from my bank account? And why was this payment process serious enough to remove me from the ship, but apparently not clear enough for the automated systems afterwards to reflect what had actually happened? Because from my perspective, this was the moment the story stopped being just that there was an onboard balance issue and became Royal Caribbean's own systems do not appear to be telling one consistent story. And so after this, the issue moved beyond Brilliance of the Seas on the 29th of June. I had 12 future Royal Caribbean group cruises booked. And I was initially told shortly after the incident by the casino team, who I booked the majority of these cruises with, that future bookings were active or unaffected. But a couple of days later, I was told something very different. On the 1st of July, I actively reached out to executive relations, whose phone number appeared in the bottom of the emails requesting the payment of the unnamed promissory note of $1,630. The person on the end of the phone, who I will not name, told me that Royal Caribbean no longer wanted to do business with me anymore. I was told that future cruises would be cancelled and refunded ambiguously. I don't know where they would be refunded to, but at this time I was not told that my celebrity cruise had been affected, but I noticed that it was thereafter. This person indicated to me they had not received a reason as to why I had been banned from future sailings. They stated that all they had been advised was by the internal global security team that I was no longer allowed to sail. At the time of recording here on the 4th of July, I have still not received clear cancellation emails for any of my cruises. I'd still been receiving communications about some of my bookings. Some things still appear active in their apps and systems, and other things have just disappeared or been revoked or apparently cancelled. So even the administrative side has been unclear. But the most important part is that if a company says it does not want to do business with you anymore, especially a travel company you have spent years sailing with and also book professionally, there should be a reason. There should be a clear factual basis. There should be a policy. There should be a record of what I supposedly did. I have asked for that. I still do not have it. So as I briefly glossed over, the most alarming part about this now was that I was told that Royal Caribbean's global security side was involved. And that is serious. Now, cruise lines do have broad powers to remove guests or refuse future carriage. And I understand why those powers exist. Ships have to be safe, crew need authority, guests who are violent, threatening, abusive or non-compliant can endanger other people. I'm not arguing that cruise lines should have no power to act. I'm asking what they believe that I personally did. Because if global security or any internal security team made a decision that I should not sail again, that sounds like something much more serious than an unpaid onboard balance. So what was it? Was I accused of threatening behaviour? Was I accused of refusing to comply? Was I accused of abusive language? Was this purely about the onboard account? Was this a casino issue? Was it an administrative issue? Was there confusion with another guest? I don't know. That is the problem. And actually, let's talk about the confusion with the other guest part. This is one part of this I want to handle really, really carefully, because I am not stating this as fact. I'm not saying I know this happened, but I do have a genuine concern that inaccurate information or confusion may have played a role. At around the same time, at 8 o'clock in the morning, on the 29th of June, 2026, aboard Brilliance of the Seas at Guest Services, there was another British guest next to me of similar height and build, who, from what I observed, was being aggressive, non-compliant, waving his arms in people's faces, and also dealing with an onboard casino and account issue. This person was not with me. He was of no relation to me. I did not know him, and I was not involved in his behaviour. But he was close enough that at points he did physically bump against me. Later, I received communications referring to an amount, as I stated, that did not match my cleared promissory note, but was much closer to the kind of amount I understood was being discussed in relation to the other incident. Again, I am not saying that Royal Caribbean definitely confused us. What I am saying is that the circumstances are concerning enough that I would like the relevant CCTV, logs, security reports, and account records reviewed. Because if Royal Caribbean's decision was based on my own conduct, then tell me what conduct. If it was based on inaccurate information, then correct it. If it was based on confusion with another guest, then that is an extremely serious error. Because right now, I cannot respond to an allegation because I have not been told what that allegation is. Royal Caribbean's public terms give them broad discretion. They say that bookings can be refused and that guests can be removed, future bookings can be affected, and guest policies can be enforced. I'm absolutely not pretending that those policies don't exist, but broad discretion does not remove the need for basic transparency and regard for human welfare. If the issue is payment, explain how the promissory note was overridden. If the issue is conduct, explain what conduct is alleged. If the issue is security, explain what factual basis that was relied upon. And if the issue is casino related, explain that. If the issue is a refusal to transport decision across Royal Caribbean Group, confirm the scope and the reason. What I object to is not the existence of rules. I very much agree with those. What I object to is the combination of severe consequences and no clear explanation. As stated earlier, there's a wider consumer point here. The cruise lines need to think seriously about debit card users, travel debit cards, and international banking differences. A lot of cruise payment systems seem designed around the assumption that guests have credit cards or are very good at managing their own money. But not everyone does, and not everyone actually wants to take out a line of credit to go on a holiday. I am uncomfortable with the idea that a guest can be placed in a worse position simply because they're using debit-based funds rather than credit. If authorization holds can reduce access to actual cash, and if those holds are outside the guest's control once placed, then cruise lines need clear, fair alternatives. Guests should understand the risks before they sail. Cruise lines should explain them clearly. And if a guest signs a promissory note stating that they have 10 days to pay, they should not be immediately removed unless there is a clear policy explaining why. I need to explain the part of Royal Caribbean systems that I think most people don't really understand until something goes wrong. Because when you spend money aboard a Royal Caribbean ship, you're not usually paying in the way you would in normal life. You're not walking into a shop, tapping your debit card, see the payment leave, and then making the next decision with that information in front of you. You're charging things to what they call a CPass account. Your CPass is your room key, your identification, your boarding pass, and your onboard expense account. It's the card that makes the ship work. You use it for drinks, shops, onboard purchases, and crucially in this story, the casino. And that sounds convenient, and most of the time it is. But convenience is obviously also part of the problem. Because charging something to a room does not feel the same as spending real money. It creates a distance. It turns spending into something abstract. You're not watching your bank account move in real time. You're not getting the same friction you would get from a normal transaction on a card. You're inside an onboard ecosystem where everything is designed to be easy, smooth, and almost invisible until that bill catches up to you. And behind that smooth experience is a payment system that can be genuinely confusing. Now add the casino to that. This is where, in my opinion, the system becomes seriously concerning. Royal Caribbean publicly states that guests can charge up to $10,000 per day to their onboard expense account for gaming at slots and tables using their CPass account. That's an extraordinary amount of money to be able to access through something that in the moment feels like a room charge. And this is the bit I want people to understand. You are not necessarily standing there making repeated bank card transactions and decisions. You are not always getting the same hard interruption of, this money is leaving my account right now. You are tapping the CPass, you are charging the room, you are staying inside the casino environment, and you are dealing with the consequences later. For someone that's calm, rational, well rested, and fully in control, maybe that is manageable. But for someone who is tired, distressed, impulsive, not in my case, but in a lot of cases drinking, chasing losses, emotionally overwhelmed, isolated, or vulnerable to gambling harm, that delayed feedback loop is dangerous. It gives spending acceleration, it reduces friction, and it lets the damage build before the final shape of the bill is fully visible. I know that because I lived it, because the reality is that once gambling becomes emotionally loaded, all of that logic becomes decoration on top of a much more basic problem. You are still gambling, and you are still spending. And when that spending is routed through a room account rather than a normal point of sale card payment, it becomes easier to detach from what is actually happening. Some people might say, well, just use a cash account then. That sounds safer, but even that is not as simple as people may think. Royal Caribbean's own guidance says that cash-backed onboard accounts still have voyage spend limits before you have to add more cash or provide a card. The public guidance I found states that cash accounts have a USD of $500 voyage spend limit for sailings of 7 nights or longer, and USD $300 for sailings of 6 nights or fewer. Once that limit is reached, the guest must deposit cash or provide a card. Otherwise, the CPass card is deactivated for purchases. So a cash account is not necessarily the same as saying, I can only spend the money I have physically handed over. It is still part of the same onboard spending system. It still allows spending up to a threshold, and it still depends on intervention happening after spending has already occurred. And that brings me to what I think is the real issue in the casino, which is control. Can an adult guest set a hard spending limit for themselves? Can they block casino charges to their room? Can they walk to guest services or the casino and say, I'm not safe with this access today. Please stop me from charging any more casino funds to my CPass. And if they say that, will the system actually enforce it? And that's the part I've not been able to find clearly explained in Royal Caribbean's public guidance and in my own personal experience either. Royal Caribbean does advertise some spending controls for children. It says parents can add a spending limit to a child's onboard expense account or opt out of the onboard expense account to block purchases entirely. So the system clearly has the ability to restrict spending in some circumstances. The question is why equally clear, accessible, and enforceable tools are not prominently available for vulnerable adults who want to restrict themselves, especially around casino room charges, but around other onboard spending as well. Royal Caribbean has introduced in the last couple of years the casino exclusion processes, which a self-exclusion can be important, but self-exclusion is a blunt instrument. It is the nuclear option. For many people, the danger point comes much earlier. It comes when they realise, I'm not okay with this access today. I need the system to stop me before this gets worse. And that's where I think the gap is. Because cruise casinos are not just casinos. They are casinos inside hotels, inside loyalty programs, inside transport systems, inside holidays, inside those closed payment ecosystems. The incentives stack up. You play more, you earn points, you get offers, you could justify more cruises, which means more casino access. And if you're already someone who uses travel as a structure like myself, escape, work, recovery, or identity, that loop can become very powerful. I take responsibility for my own gambling decisions, and I need to say that clearly. But personal responsibility does not mean that the system is well designed. If a company allows guests to charge up to $10,000 per day to an onboard account for casino play, then I think it also has the responsibility to provide clear, visible, and enforceable ways for guests to reduce or block that access before harm escalates. The simplest way I could put it is this, is that Royal Caribbean makes it extremely easy to accelerate spending. It is far less clear how a vulnerable adult guest is supposed to hit the brakes. And when that acceleration is obvious, but the braking system is unclear, hidden, or even mostly, in this case, unavailable, people can get badly hurt before the final bill ever arrives. So this brings me to what I've asked Royal Caribbean for. I've asked for the specific reason I was removed from Brilliance of the Seas, the department or person who'd authorised it, whether the decision was based on payment, conduct, casino activity, security concerns, or something else. The specific policy or contractual provision they say I breached, the reason my future reservations are being cancelled, whether Royal Caribbean Group or brands are affected, which it seems like they are, what evidence has been reviewed, and whether CCTV Security reports, guest services notes, casino records and account records were considered. I also asked whether inaccurate information or confusion with another guest played any role, and whether there's any appeal or review process, because that is all I'm asking for at this stage, is a clear explanation. Now, I know some people will say that I must have done something. That's fine. Ask the same question I'm asking. What did I do? If there's evidence, I want to know what it is. If there is a policy, I want to know which one. And if there is a report, I want to know what it alleges. Because if Royal Caribbean believes I behaved badly enough to be removed from a ship and banned from future travel, then there should be a record of that. I cannot defend myself against a blank space. And I also want to be honest about my own part in this. I allowed gambling to become too big a part of my cruise strategy, and I underestimated how quickly onboard charges can build. I overestimated my ability to manage the emotional side of casino play. I was already carrying unresolved grief and stress from the previous year, and I think I used grand plans, travel, and casino rewards as a way to feel in control. That's on me, and I'm addressing that. But personal responsibility does not mean accepting unexplained corporate action. It does not mean a company can remove you, take the payment anyway, cancel future travel, affect another brand, and still not explain the factual basis. Those are separate issues. To be honest with you, I didn't expect to make this video. I expected to spend my birthday sailing, and I would still be on this cruise at this time of recording. Instead, I ended up in Ravenna, a cruise port notoriously a distance away from major cities, then Bologna, then Andorra, trying to understand how a payment issue turned into being removed from a ship and apparently banned from future Royal Caribbean group travel. I'm really not asking anyone to attack Royal Caribbean. All I'm asking for is for Royal Caribbean to explain what happened. If they provide a clear explanation, I will update the record. If they made a mistake, I really would like them to correct it. If they believe I did something serious enough to justify this, I want them to tell me what that was, because right now, the consequence is absolutely abundantly clear, but the reason is missing. And if this can happen to someone with my history with the brand, someone who has sailed dozens of times, someone who also works in travel, someone who has never had a disciplinary issue on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, then I think every cruiser deserves to understand how these decisions are made. That's all I want to know, and that's why I still need answers. If you have any questions at all about what's happened here, I will try and approach these in the comments section below.